y'all, and welcome back to Sillage and Sorcery, a podcast about perfume, all things fragrance from the vantage point of two witches. I'm B. Sampson of Venus Invictus, and I'm joined today by my lovely co-host,
Melissa Sifjardóttir of Sif Sniffs.
and our amazing guests who I'm so excited to talk to, Austin Fuller of BaneXBramble. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here. And it's not an opportunity that I get super often to talk about perfume with perfumers. I can talk about magic with witches all day, and I can talk about perfume with witches all day, but talking about perfume magic with both perfumer witches is completely different thing. And so that's really exciting.
Yes, I think that we're a dime a dozen for sure. I feel like there should be more of us out there.
There probably are. Who know? I haven't found. Well, I found plenty, but talking about perfume with people is also weird, and I have spicy opinions on it, anyways. And I'm sure we'll break into.
Ooh, I can't wait.
We live for the hot takes.
Yes. So let's get started. What is your big three? Because I'm dying to know.
Tell you, but then I'd have to. No, I'm just kidding. Pisces Sun, and I just had a birthday.
I believe it.
Thank you. Leo Moon, and then a Sag Rising. Which, in my opinion, some of my favorite closest people are all Sag Rising. So I'm happy to be one of the team.
Listen, we love a fire sign on the podcast, so
Thank you. Yeah, I think my fiery disposition covers up the water pretty well.
well, it's actually interesting in Vedic astrology. I'm technically a Pisces. So what inspired you to become a perfumer? How did you get started in the world of perfumery?
Do you all know Chronotope Perfume? He's a friend, but Carter Weeks Maddox, who is doing Chronotope Perfume, really encouraged me back in like 2019, 2020. But before all of that, I guess we could start at the beginning of when it comes to magic, and then also the intersection of how scent plays into that. I was a kid that was plagued by really really awful dreams and visions. Got out of that at a young age and always had an inclination to the esoteric, which is that's what I do full time now, is a professional witch or something. But on top of that, I'll never forget when I was like 4, a family friend at the time had taken me to go get a tarot reading. And I remember walking into this hole in the wall, very early 2000s, occult/metaphysical shop, had like the awful tile ceilings, which is, whatever. But they stand the test of time, is like those will
Yes.
be around for so long. And like this wall of cauldrons. And then I walked into the back to get this tarot reading, and this really eccentric woman with awful blonde permed hair. This is in Florida in the early 2000s, so that was very of the time. And all these like gorgeous pink, or I'm like violet and red and sapphire blue, like votive glass candles, very whimsigoth. And then, but what I remember most about it, aside from the reading, which was very intense for a 4-year-old, but whatever, and probably put way too much pressure on me to be something as a kid. But the thing that I remember the most is like the smell of incense, of like Nag Champa Agarbati incense, because I wasn't like looking at the box and I was like 4. I didn't like know what that was, and it wasn't until probably I was like 11 or 12 where I was at another like a chinoiserie shop in some mall, and I had found like the trademark blue box Agarbati Nag Champa, and like I was like, oh my god, this is the smell that I've like loved forever, and I'm literally burning some right now. So I mean,
It's so iconic.
it's so iconic, and that is I really think that the magical and the fragrance thing had always leaned into each other. When I was in high school, I really wanted to go study biochem and then eventually potentially go to grass. I think some of us might be able to relate to those things here.
Yes.
And then I didn't realize that like you didn't need it.
Uh,
I'm happy that I didn't pursue that. And then doing things off and on. I worked in hair for a little while, and then around that time is when I had met Carter, and he had encouraged me to go into perfumery. And then I was like, oh shit, like you don't have to, I can just buy the things and start working on things. And he gave me a couple of resources, and that's where I started to branch out from there. But that was about the time also that the pandemic happened. So I was cloistered and like secluded away. And then my witchcraft business, BaneXBramble, took off or started taking off.
Super cool.
Speaking of BaneXBramble, can you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do and the ethos behind your brand?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. BaneXBramble is kind of a representation of like what I do in my work. It's very personal. My ethos, I think, is as I like to tell people, is to be good or be bad, just be good at it. Is kind of how I like to end things. So
It's iconic. That's some iconic shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
thanks.
I love that. I think the market for like spiritual supplies, even perfume to an extent, is so oversaturated. How do you think you stand out? Like, how do you stand out in that market?
I think I'm pretty like forward facing. I'm pretty public. I do a lot of different things. I run BaneXBramble. I'm on a more local level. I just recently, a couple of months ago in January, started doing something called A Culture Tampa, which is just like a discussion place for esoteric subjects and to build local in-person community. But I think what sets me apart, I hope, is a sense of I try to be rather impartial. It's not my point or my position to impose too much of what I do on you, but I hope that I can be honest, and I hope I can be very, I've been doing witchcraft for a long time, or some semblance of it, right? And hopefully I can impart for those who ask or for those who are looking.
Very cool. Well, congratulations on starting the Occulture Tampa. That is so sick. I wish I had a resource like that when I lived there.
I know, yeah. It's at Dysfunctional Grace.
How cool. And for those of you listening, Dysfunctional Grace is like the coolest shop slash space in general. They have like taxidermy, oddities, like it's just such a cool spot.
Yeah.
Gosh, I feel like I'm out of this conversation being a not Florida person. We need to get someone from like New England.
Can you walk us through like what does your creative process look like when developing a fragrance in particular?
I feel like it's different every time I'm launching a new house line of like pretty standard magical oils, conjure oils, and things like that. So very classic things like there's almost already a standard recipe built in, especially for things like a come to me love perfume oil, or a Cleopatra perfume oil, or something like that. Is they're typically going to have heavy fragrances in them to give off that power of perfume in general, whereas some other oils might still have a fragrance, but it's almost like a tangential. And so I pay homage to that tradition of oil making in that way, or at least I'm trying to, while also making it my own. But in terms of something like the Visions of the Witch's Rose series, which is a very personal year-long dedication to 3 perfumes from an actual spirit, I tend to, within the worldview that I take, these things are very alive and have a spirit that is
Animism.
inhabiting them. It's a very animistic perspective to this. And so incorporating this rose that I've tended to, the Visions of the Witch's Rose set actually has like a rose absolute in it that I created from that very rose, and then dissecting some aspects of rose through what the plant spirit is also telling me, as well as like the myth and body of lore. Our one is dedicated to the sweetness of honey and rose and love, but also the sting of losing it. Whereas the R2 is very focused on the dead and memento mori and all the shades and ghosts that you might find in the cemetery. R3 has everything to do with the spirits that are attached to them are quite witches in themselves. It has the connotation of domination and seduction and all the negative malefica of witchcraft.
That's so cool.
Thank you.
I'm curious to know how much does astrology play into the role of creating perfumes?
Sure. For visions, not much, because I'm really designing something around the actual rose that I'm working with. I have a planetary set as well. And I wish I could be so badass and be like, hey, I did this on like a really proper election and made these at these certain times and everything like that. Unfortunately, if I were still doing that, Saturn would not exist because, we'd still be waiting on a good
Yeah.
Saturn election or a good Jupiter election. Maybe because I do plan with this new shop restructuring, all of those things will get maybe a little bit of a reformulation as well as like a little bit of a facelift. Maybe then I can actually incorporate that into some of my perfume. But yeah, I would love to say a big deal, but like not so much.
Yeah, for sure. So come with me for a second. You are at your perfume organ, you are making a perfume. What is one ingredient that you find yourself going back to again and again?
I really feel like my perfumes are the same, like 15 materials with like maybe one star material and then just all at different ratios. So like
Yeah.
they do smell different, but I gravitate towards, I like to say I have a very limited palette, but I know that palette very well and I know what I can do with it. And it's a very versatile palette. So I'll say some of the things that I constantly gravitate towards is benzoin.
Love.
I love castoreum. I don't care that it comes from a little beaver. Give me a fur. And rip those little nads out of them. I don't give a shit. I'm totally kidding, kind of.
Getting us canceled is great.
Sorry. To sure get synthetic. I genuinely don't think the synthetic castoreum works as well because it's not as solid. But I also feel that way about synthetic benzoin as well.
Mm.
It just doesn't have the same kind of like gorilla grip.
Those are some of my favorite materials to work with as well. Curious to know, so how often does chemistry come up in your work? Like when you're making a perfume, do you consider yourself more like on the science part of perfumery or like more as an artist?
When I first started, it was a lot more important for me to make sure that I knew what was going on in a fragrance. So everyone's worst nightmare when you start out and you accidentally make a shift space and then your perfume starts turning black and you're like, oh, what's happening? So learning how to mitigate those kinds of occurrences. Now I think there's a bit less concern. And when I first started, everything was about, being very like right and being very clear. And I mean that like literally as in like no particles in my perfume, no, like everything has to be, and now I'm like, I add, like sometimes I'm like, well, we need so many different like herbs and things like that in it. Sometimes they might be dry, and then they might all get strained out. So, there might be a residual amount of cloudiness or anything from whatever else I might put in there.
Organic material, yeah.
For chemistry, it used to be a much bigger deal if somebody had asks, or I have one friend right now who's getting into perfume, her peek behind the curtain of like, hey, this is how I actually really work, and then going into a little bit of that chemistry. But for me, throw something together, see if you like it, see if you don't.
Well, that is a perfect segue into the next question. How does blending work for you? Like, what obstacles do you seem to face and how do you overcome them?
This is the downside of being very imaginative and in fragrance in the mind. I've kind of adjusted myself in a way where I can be more impartial, where I try not to think too much of a fragrance before it becomes the thing, because then I find that leads me to disappointment about how something turns out because I just can't quite capture it. But for me, blending, I'm not like a method girl. I'm not going to sit there and make like ratios of 10 to 1, 10 to 0 or whatever. And it's too clinical for me. It's too methodical. Luckily, having a really limited palette, like, and a pretty good sense of what those materials are, I can basically get something down really quickly. And maybe that's on me, but I mean, that's just how I work. For me, it's more of an organic thing and allowing it to smell it at the end of it and be like, do I like this objectively? Yes or no? Or did I hit the nail in the direction of where I'm trying to go? Yes or no? And then if not, or if I didn't get enough, or maybe there's too much, then one of these statues will happily like to have it poured over it and they'll be fed that. So it's okay. It doesn't go to waste, at least
Good,
around
good.
here.
Give us some perfume hot takes. Do you have any hot takes for the?
I have probably too many. I hate the myth of French perfume. I think that I don't see it so much anymore, and maybe it's just because I'm so like invested in my own community. But I really despise the notion of French perfumery, mainly because without American materials, like it wouldn't exist. Tobacco, tonka, vanilla, tuberose, etc., etc. Jasmine, which isn't an American origin, but one of the huge reasons that the Philippines were colonized is because of Sampaquita. So I think it's very easy for Americans, not just Americans, but for the vast majority of the world, especially the French, to claim that they've created something or even have dispersed the idea that something is inherently French when it really relies on the backs of nations which have completely been decimated or have risen and fallen, or entirely new economies that have been created for one particular material. Looking at you, Madagascar.
Yeah.
So, or completely decimated, such as Haiti, for more than just their perfume raw materials, but that sugar and all those things, as well as certain woods and things like that.
Everything you are saying is facts right now.
Thank you.
I fully agree. I think that for a long time, a lot of people look at French perfumery with rose tinted glasses, as if like this is the peak of what it means to be a perfumer. This is perfume excellence. And it's like, there are cool people all over the world doing cool shit.
Yeah.
You don't have to have this like chemistry background and go to this fucking artisanal school for most of your life to learn perfume.
And I think too, one of the things that I have people come to me with a lot is they're often like, I really actually don't care for fragrance, but I really like yours. And that's very sweet and lovely. But I think to scratch beyond just the complementariness of it all, which is again nice, but hopefully they're not laying it on too thick for me. But I think that one of the virtues of being indie, if you even want to call it that, we're not learning the same method. And so we all have a different method of going about it. And I understand that there's individuality that comes out of France, or any big box manufactured perfume. And there are some hits, like
For sure.
every time I smell a boy wearing Versace Eros, like my heart gets crushed. But I'm also like, wow, where is he? And why, like, date me now?
Yeah.
But I think ultimately what we're experiencing, especially with how democratized the information on perfume is now, as opposed to even just a couple of years ago, even when I was first starting out, where it was pretty difficult to find information. You had to know where you looked. Because of this democratization, we have a really cool mix of things that are going on. But maybe too much perfume, maybe too much introspection. That's my other hot take. I think that maybe we have too much perfume. Not saying people shouldn't create it, but I think perspective in perfume. And I don't know, where do I fall on that? I'm just making stuff for spiritual reasons. I'm like, I don't really even consider what I do perfumery. I think at this point, maybe what I just said will change tomorrow. I don't know, but I think that what I do is perfumery to some degree, but uh, I think there's a reason that I don't overlap very much in the perfume world and the witchcraft world, and that's okay with me.
Yeah, that's understandable. If you could give advice on someone who's just starting their perfume journey, what advice would that be?
Don't do what I did. Learn how to read cast numbers is what I'm going to tell you. Learn what a cast number is, and then go to the Good Sense Company. Go to Perfumer's Apprentice. You're going to have to jump back and forth. But like type in the cast number and make sure that you're not buying 15 of the same material. Like for a long time, I didn't know that Amber Extreme was that incredibly annoyingly douchey, potent, pervasive with a high sillage. Speaking of Sillage and Sorcery, that's what I was looking for. And like I was buying ambroxan, amber super, tobaccorol,
Orcanons.
anything
Yeah,
that
all of
like,
them.
like all of them, like pouring like way too much in there to like, why won't it perfuse? And it wouldn't, and it's like, oh, you can actually just find this like $5 material that, knocks your socks off if you put more than a little bit in. Read a cast number. Also, I think it can be really helpful, honestly, to bug people who do it. So maybe, hopefully, someone who lives close to you. I don't think that perfume information or talking about, this is cool to talk about perfume in this way, but like talking about materials or things like that, I don't, unless you're smelling it, like who gives a fuck? Because you can't conceptualize what it's doing. You can talk about it, but I mean, it's just not like, if you want to talk about a rose, go smell a rose,
That's
and
really
if you
good
want to talk
advice.
about the nuances of three roses, go smell three different roses. Thank you.
Right.
Um,
For sure. I think that like nothing beats being able to smell raw materials and understand the feeling, the smell, the color, the thing that they're bringing to the table.
yeah.
Can I just also put in a personal thank you for calling it Sillage? When we first started recording, I was like, oh, we're Sillage and Sorcery. And B was like, it's Sillage.
Hey, well, as I say, screw the French. So it can be sillage. It could be projection. It could be siège if you want it to be siège croissant or whatever. Can I have a pan au chocolat or however they say it in Canada?
Vindicated, B. Vindicated.
The vindication. Okay, I'm just gonna go.
So, if you could create a scent for a fictional character, who would it be and what would it smell like?
Ooh,
This question is stressful.
well, it's very funny because some of these fictional characters actually I do make perfumes for. So I think, just off the top of my head, I think I would make a perfume for Faust,
Mm.
and I would cheekily name it like Mephistopheles or something stupid like that, maybe to freak him out. I think I would bottle it very in the same vein. Start off with like an ink, like some sort of ink accord, and like hopefully like wet old book pages, tincture, maybe. I think I would have to make it smell. It would probably stink a little bit. I'd have to make it smell like a little bit of sulfur, and then maybe like, I think a lot of roses. My next thing was the Red Queen, and then I would have to just like really lean into the rosiness of that.
What's your favorite note to work with?
So that, like note rose, I guess, but any of your phenethyl alcohols and any of your phenol molecules that I have way too many of. Recently, like completely reorganized my thing. Do you know how difficult it is to go through probably like a good like 20 phenethyl, all the same size, 15 ml perfumer's apprentice labels, that I'm just like, after reading, just looking for the pH for a while, your brain starts to go numb, and it's truly dreadful.
At a certain point, you're like, what am I looking at?
What am I looking at anymore? Rosy materials are, yeah, really lovely.
I'm glad there's someone out there who loves rose. I find it like it's such a difficult thing to work with.
I agree, because rose is just one of those things where it goes in 80 different directions. Is it citrusy? Is it leaning into gourmand? Is it more incensey or ambery? Is it, where does it fall? And is it fruity? Is it clean? Is it soapy? I'm really in love with, the Dollar Tree by me has these little bottles of Yardley English Rose like body splashes. And it's like the most like aldehydic, overly saccharine, like does not smell like a rose at all, but it also like kind of does. And it really just like smells like a ton of aldehydes, but I love it so much. And I just like douse everything in it. And I'm like, this is what we're going to smell like, is Nag Champa and Beth.
For those of you who are listening and not watching on YouTube, the moment Austin said it can go in so many different ways, me and B's heads almost came off with how hard we were nodding. We were just like, oh my god, yes,
Yes.
yes, it can go so many different ways.
I think the problem with rose is that it wants to be in every perfume. Is it's very good at blending in to the point where in my opinion, I think it's blending into the point, which can be really lovely, but the problem is getting it to stand out. That's the hard part. And I think even with my Rose series, I think it relies heavily on everything else that's in it, as opposed to it just being, if I wanted to take PEA and Damasco and Beta or just like straight up rose oil and put it in a bottle, I could. But then what would that be? I'd just be selling rose oil.
What's your least favorite to work?
I think anything I hate I have a hard time working with ozonic materials, although I will say anything ozonic I'll usually have a little bit in my stuff because it really, in my experience, projects. Like that will like carry your perfume. If you wanna, like me, I want to be smelled before I'm seen. And so if you're wanting like just a little bit of Halionol or something like that in a perfume can really like increase that projection. I have a hard time, I think, working with anything that's like fresh, anything that's green. I don't want to smell clean. If I wanted to do that, then I would go take a bath. And even then my baths usually contain, a ton of herbs and things like that in it to get the evil eye off me or whatever.
Bunch of graveyard dirt.
Yeah, exactly. Load me up, Scotty. I'm not a big fan of like clean and fresh, except for when a really beautiful boy is wearing Versace Eros. But other than that, that's not my favorite.
If you were stranded on a desert island, you're only allowed to have one perfume and it cannot be one of your own. What perfume would it be?
It would have to be, it might be like a box of Nag Champa. It also might be the discontinued Marc Jacobs Decadence, not Divine Decadence. Or it might be nothing. I think it might be easier for me to not choose than to ever choose again, and I'll just live off the smell of breeze, salty breeze, and fish and sand and whatever else that rotting palm leaves that this imaginary island has for me. And then maybe I'll like meld that into some water and start like bathing in it and smell like that. I don't know.
Why do we all go to tropical islands when it's a deserted island? Like, how
I
do you
don't
know it's not
know.
going to be
I don't know.
fucking in the steppes of Siberia
Which
or some shit?
is so much more me. Like, give me
Castaway.
like, yeah, like give me a yak fur coat and some like, some
I'd rather be cold than
muskmallow.
hot. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And I'd much rather like live on like a stormy like little enclave rock. Give me a John of Patmos moment and let me experience divine revelations in my cave in my like incense dead fish for the rest of my life. I don't know.
That's the goal.
What is the most overrated fragrance trend in the larger fragrance community?
Trends in general, I think. And that and like skin, like glossy, like that whole like or like DS and Durga selling basically ISO Super in a bottle as like a fragrance booster. First, I hate clean anything. The conceptualization of that is so like it can easily teeter into this purity standard, this false thing. It doesn't mean anything. It can easily teeter into eugenics for me.
100%.
I just don't understand why. Also, nothing is interesting. Like, if everybody walks around smelling like fucking ambretolide and Isoi Super, and yeah, I mean, I think even like, if you were gonna like smell like aldehyde C12, like douse yourself in it. I mean, that would be awful, but like, go ahead. I think that would be far more interesting to me than, just smelling like pretty materials. And I love those pretty materials. I love ambretolide. I love galaxolide. Give me a forever chemical.
Yeah.
Give me,
I like it too.
let us drink the microplastics of galaxolide that comes from our laundry detergent. I love all those things, but I just don't think that they're impressive when for some reason for a while we like based the entirety of like what perfumery should be off of it. I think it's a very toxic time, but also no trends for me. Thanks.
What do you think is an underrated fragrance trend?
American perfumery that, and I hope these things don't trend, but perfumery that's led by women, perfumery that is led by women of color, perfumery that is led by trans women, all those things which inspire and are so deeply ingrained in perfumery anyways. But like, I think perfume that is anything but European, British, or just dudes who are doing it. But I also I hope now more than ever that we can move past this fallacy of like European perfumery, French perfumery, nice perfumery, and actually do something interesting again. I think there was a retaliation back in the late 90s, early 2000s trend, but I think there's like this antithetical, not clean thing that was happening, especially when we had, a lot of scents that were meant to smell awful. And I think that's very interesting, but I hope we can take a little bit of that perspectivism and come out of the whole ISO-y super skin scent thing, and then give that to people and give new perspective on it. And that's what I hope becomes the next trend that isn't a trend.
That's lovely. What is the first fragrance that you fell in love with?
Nag Champa is gonna hold, but I think if we're talking about something that's actually bottled, I think my first real perfume ever that wasn't just stealing it from my grandfather or my mother was going to be Viktor and Rolf's Spice Bomb. That's also classified as a douchey perfume. But if it isn't, then let me be wrong. But I used to wear that to every day. And it lasted so long, and I used to wear it to my first job ever when I was 15 at Steak and Shake. After a while, it became the smell of Viktor and Rolf Spice Bomb plus burgers, fries, and onions, and I actually could not smell it for years without getting sick from it. And then I don't know what happened, just time has passed, and now I can smell it again. Such a love for that intense, spicy, woody of the time.
Yeah, it's iconic.
It's iconic.
What's a smell that you wish you could bottle but you haven't figured out how to yet?
Whatever is in that damn plum note that they have in Marc Jacobs Decadence. I think one of the hardest things as someone who really loves an amber or anything quite heavy, maybe this is a sentiment other people will share, but I'm always looking how to make top notes work for me. The things that give lift and sparkle quality to the fragrance, kind of be able to take some of the techniques that commercial perfumers are using to get these really sparkly, very top note heavy, very light perfumes that literally when you spray them, it just feels like you've just doused the room in glitter. I wish I could be able to figure out a little bit more of what they're doing in that department. That isn't just people relying on saying oh, use linalool or use aldehyde C12, because that was one of the advice that I always got. And I was like, this is crazy that you would tell anybody to do that. We got to get off the idea that aldehyde is gonna fix your problems, because I think in most cases it'll make it worse.
I would agree.
All right. So this is the end. So we're here for the free plug party. So what do you got coming out? What do you got on the horizon?
So my name's Austin Fuller. I go by BaneXBramble. BaneXBramble.com is my website. I do a lot of things that aren't perfumery. I do divination. I do classes on magic and witchcraft. I take clients for spell work. I also have a shop where I sell magical oils, incenses, brews, charms. And things like that, as well as perfume. And I'm literally going through, I don't know if it will be ready by the time that this episode comes out, but it will be soon ready by the time this episode comes out, where I will have completely added a ton of writing and just information on magic and how to use some of these materials, these formulas and things like that in spell work to hopefully make your life better and change things that you want to see in the world. And with that, I think I'll say be good or be bad, just be good at it.
Yes, such a good sign off.
Thank you so much for coming.